All right. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to Bike Minds. It's great to see so many people here today, and we've got a topic for you that I've been looking forward to personally for a very long time, because what could possibly be more exciting and positive than stories about bikes and children? We're going to hear 4 stories today. We'll have you in and out within the next hour so you can get back to whatever you're doing. We're going to hear from a teacher. We're going to hear from an instructor, from a parent, and from someone who has a great story to share from their own childhood. And together, this is going to paint a beautiful, positive picture of the many joys of children and cycling. I'm your host for today, Matt Pinder. I'm a transportation engineer by day, but one of my volunteering things that I do is I am the co-founder of Bike Minds, and we are a storytelling event that focuses on positive and inspiring bike-related stories. Our mission is to change the way that you feel about people who ride bikes one story at a time. And our vision is a world where everyone can see themselves riding a bike. And through Bike Minds, we are changing the dialogue and we're changing the perception about people who ride bikes to be more positive and more inclusive. So as I said, we're going to have 4 stories today. After each storyteller, the audience, you're going to have a chance to ask some questions. So feel free to drop those questions into the chat throughout the stories, and I will be pulling some of them up to ask the storytellers. And then at the end of the event, after all 4 stories are done, we're going to call up our 4 storytellers again and have a group discussion. So please be active in the chat, send your support, send your excitement, and send your questions, and let's make this a really fun event. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing our first storyteller. Bradley Fisher is a lifelong Chicagoan, teacher, husband, and father of 2 amazing daughters. He is determined to live a life infused with adventure, nature, and discovery. Passionate about inclusive bicycle travel, he's never happier than riding with his special needs daughter, whether it's on a quick errand, a day ride, or a week-long tour through the mountains of Idaho on their adaptive tandem, aptly named Lilia's Wings. Over to you, Bradley.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you to Bike Minds for having me. Somebody said to start with a joke, so apropos of nothing other than the fact that I won't be duct taping my cats to the wall and they might make their appearance at some point, here is the joke. But my talk is actually going to be about my family, and here they are. My wife, Tina, looking like a rock star in her shades, and our older daughter, Chloe, and the focus of the talk today, our younger daughter, Lilia. It's the story of how Lilia was really dealt a tough hand in life. She was born with a rare genetic disorder called GATA-D2B associated neurodevelopmental disorder, which is a mouthful, or you can just say GAND, which has a host of cognitive and physical challenges. But what this story is really about is how really the biggest challenge was that it gave her a really kind of frightened view of the world, and how through cycling and bike camping, she was able to put a lot of those fears behind her. And it's also the story of our family and how we were able to find a really inclusive and immersive activity that we were able to do together that we really didn't find anywhere else. So Lilia started adaptive sports activities when she was about 4 or 5 years old, starting with adaptive skiing, and then moving on to adaptive rock climbing, and even things as exotic as adaptive water skiing. And these were absolutely incredible experiences for Lilia, and they began the process of her coming out of her shell and leaving her fears behind her. But the one thing that we found with these activities is that they didn't typically have a way for the whole family to participate. So for example, at this water ski event, it was set up for kids with special needs and people with disabilities. And we were all there. My older daughter, Chloe, was there. And of course, she would have loved to have been water skiing along with her sister. But we were able to find that inclusiveness and that participatory nature of the event through adaptive cycling and bike camping. And here you see Lilia on her first adaptive bike, a trailer bike that's attached to the back of my bike. We had to make a ton of adaptations to this bike. You can see the huge platform running boards for her feet, the backrest and the seat belt. One of the issues with GAND is that it causes her to have extremely low muscle tone. So that's kind of the reason for all the adaptations. But even with all that, here we are out on a beautiful day in the world, enjoying cycling like any other family. And then a few years later, all of those adaptations are gone. This is a blog post I wrote about our first bike overnight. And you can see that Lilia has pretty much outgrown the trailer bike, but this is the point at which we went out on a bike ride and didn't come home for the first time. And that was really a big shift, and seeing how Lilia would react to that. Once Lilia outgrew her trailer bike, we switched to this tandem. The format is known as a semi-recumbent tandem. And it's a wonderful bike that has a ton of advantages over a typical tandem. We both have unobstructed views of the world. We can easily talk to each other. We don't have to keep the same cadence. Lilia can pedal or she can coast. This is actually in the mountains of northern Idaho. It's really our biggest adventure to date. And just a quick story about this trip. I mentioned that Lilia, kind of had a fearful view of the world, and it was really kind of debilitating. Just leaving the house, going to school, going to friends, relatives, restaurant, anywhere, she would just curl up in a ball and lie down on the floor. And we had an absolute blast on this trip in Idaho. And if anyone would have told me that the same girl a few years later would have been, cycling through the mountains. In fact, at one point during a rainstorm, I was kind of freaking out, getting our rain gear out, worried about how she was going to react. And she just started to giggle giddily. And that's when I knew that she had an adventurous spirit. And this was just such a wonderful activity for us as a family and for her in particular. So we were always trying to strike the balance with Lilia between independence and being able to not be left behind and go on our longer bike camping trips. So this is new bike day in the parking lot of the bike shop with an adaptive trike and Lilia's first go round. And you can see that she's loving being the pilot of her own rig. So that was the balance we were always trying to strike, is having Lilia be as independent as possible, but have the experience be as inclusive as possible and being able to go wherever we wanted to go. And that led to some interesting contraptions like what you're seeing here. We're actually towing her adaptive trike behind our tandem. And we did a number of trips like this. And the benefit was we could do 40, 50 miles on the tandem. And then the last few miles before we got to camp, we'd detach the trike and Lily would ride in like everybody else to camp. So just an absolutely wonderful experience for her and for us as a family. It also led to Lilia making friends. And that's a real challenge for kids with special needs. But when you're out in the world on a bike camping adventure, there's no hiding in your room. There's no watching your iPad or Netflix for hours on end. And, this was another step in Lilia, coming out of her shell and just having, a great time and seeing the world as a inviting place and seeing adventures as something that are, positive to go on. We didn't want to give up on Lilia ever being able to ride a two-wheel bike independently. So with the help of an amazing physical therapist, that specializes in teaching kids with special needs how to ride a two-wheel bike. This was just before the pandemic, and I think this was the first 15 feet or so of her her first independent, semi-independent bike ride. And that led to her next bike, which was an e-bike. And again, trying to strike that balance of independence without limitations. The e-bike really fit the bill in that case. Before the e-bike, she would be able to ride maybe 2-3 miles on her regular bike. And, you know, with the e-bike, we've been on 10-12 mile bike rides. So it remains to be seen exactly how that will fit into our future bike adventures. But it's been a godsend during the pandemic. It's gotten us out pretty much every day until 3 feet of snow got dumped on Chicago and we had to take a pause, but we're getting back to it now. So we felt like we found this kind of secret activity that, you know, families with kids with special needs or people with disabilities could do that would be super inclusive. So one of the organizations that we did a lot of our bike camping adventures with is called Out Our Front Door in Chicago. And I've been volunteering with them for a couple of years. So we're actually starting a program we're calling Bike Camping for Everyone, to be able to share the same kinds of experiences I've described here with families that have a child or another adult member with a disability. And we're looking forward to kicking that off this summer as things start to get back to normal. And that is kind of our story. I just wanted to kind of conclude with saying that, you know, it's not often overtly stated, but there's a general consensus that, you know, people like my daughter would be happiest living a life of small horizons and limited experience and expectations. And I think Lilia has proven that that is not necessarily the case, and that people with disabilities deserve to have a life of adventure and exploration and just an amazing life like anyone else. You know, your IQ or your physical limitations don't preclude you from enjoying the same things in life that everyone else does. So I thought it would be nice to just say hello to the lady of the hour and maybe ask her a quick question about, do you like to go bike camping? I know we haven't been able to do too much over the last year, but
Yes.
what do you think about it? You looking forward to getting back to it?
Step back 1 sec, sweetie. What do you like about biking?
Good.
What do you like about it?
But have fun hot.
Biking has a family
A
heart.
family heart. So that's one of Lilia's expressions that she uses to say things that are very meaningful to her. So thank you for letting me share my story and Lilia's story. And thank you to Bike Minds for having me. Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much.
Wow, thanks so much, Bradley. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's grinning from ear to ear from that story. That was so inspiring, and we even got a guest appearance at the end too. Super
Yes,
cool.
I didn't know if we'd pull that off. But
We have just time for one question from the audience before we go to the next speaker. Did you cycle before having Lilia, or would you say that she motivated you to get more into cycling?
No, you know, Lily has an older sister, Chloe, and I cycled a ton with her. You know, we did a trip on the C&O Canal when Chloe was about 10. And so I already had in mind that, you know, I was always going to be cycling with my kids. And when you have a daughter, you know, that was born with some, you know, some challenges, you have to kind of rethink how that's going to work. And that's kind of what started everything that I kind of talked about today.
Very cool. Well, thanks again, Bradley, and we'll see you again at the end of the session. And for now, I'm going to start calling upon our next storyteller. JANICE Battista LOWE is a high school teacher out of Malton, Ontario, where she has been an educator for over 12 years. JANICE has a specialty in youth outreach and started a community-based organization called the GLE movement, which stands for Grow, Lead, Excel. Janice's venture into the cycling community was sparked by the pandemic and noticing the lack of bicycles in her school community of Malton. This then propelled her Summer Cycle 2020 initiative to target that need. And this past January, Janice was awarded the 2020 Phil Green Award by the City of Mississauga's Cycling Advocacy Advisory Committee, an award that recognizes a Mississauga resident who has shown exceptional effort to promote cycling in the community. Over to you, Janice.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Bike Minds, for making me a part of this event today. My name is Janice Lowe, and I am an educator in the Malton community. And a part of my role is to do youth outreach and support disengaged youth. And as Matt mentioned, that my venture into the bike world actually just happened last year in 2020 during the pandemic. So if you can remember back in March, after the March break, students didn't go back to in-school learning. Rather, they were learning virtually from home. And for a lot of the youth in our community, that was something that they struggled with. So by the end of April, I had a list of many students who were considered disengaged. So this meant that they didn't attend their classes or they didn't do any work. So it's my responsibility to reach out and see how I can support them for them to be successful. So I remember it was the first week of May, and I had my list of students that I needed to make contact with. And I decided to make my calls outside on my porch. So I stepped outside, it was sunny, it was warm, and I picked up the phone to call my first student. And when he answered the phone, obviously we spoke, and he had told me he was struggling with his mental health. He was depressed. The pandemic made him feel isolated. He spent most of his days in his room in the dark, and that made me concerned. So I told him, I'm like, I'm talking to you right now. I'm sitting on my porch. It's so warm outside. It's beautiful. It's sunny. You should go outside, and then why don't you just go on your bike and go for a bike ride? And he said that he didn't own a bike and that he didn't even know how to ride one. So that kind of took me back, and I said, okay, well, how about if I'm able to get you a bike? Would that be something you're interested in? Would you be willing to accept it? Would you be willing to learn how to ride? And he said, yeah. So that is when the seed was planted. I wanted to know how many more youth in my community didn't have access to bikes. So I called my second student and I asked him if he had a bike. He said no. My third student, he said no. And by the end of all my conversations with my youth, I realized that the majority of them didn't have access to bikes, and nor did many of their siblings. And I just thought that that was unfair. I looked at my own family. I'm a mother of 4 children. All they needed to do was open up the garage door, put on their helmet, go on their bike, and they had some independence, some freedom. And this was something that the youth that I served in the Malton community weren't getting. So that same afternoon, my husband walked into the kitchen and I said, or actually I told him about the conversations I had with the youth and that they didn't have bikes. And I have an Instagram where I connect with my youth. And I said, you know what, I'm going to put a post out and see how many more youth in the community don't have a bike. And he said, you're crazy. He said, we don't even have one bike to provide any of the youth that you even spoke to, never mind opening it up to the whole community. He says, how about if we can't support the need? And I just answered, we will. So I went ahead, I put out the post, and by the end of that day, I had now a list of 30 youth who needed a bike. So I said, okay, well, now I need to get to work. So I started calling my family, my friends, my colleagues. I started talking to my neighbors and just saying, do you have a bike that you no longer use? Has your child outgrown a bike that you're willing to donate? And through that, slowly we started collecting bikes. Now, some of the bikes we had were not rideable, needed new tubes, needed brakes to be fixed. So I reached out to a few of my close friends and asked them if they would be willing to sponsor a bike. So they provided me $25 each, and the $25 covered the repairs. Thankfully, I had a neighbor who just lived down the road who had previously had a bike shop and was willing to fix the bikes at cost. So by the end of that week, we had 10 bikes. So we had 10 bikes for the original list of students I had spoken to who had said they didn't have bikes. So I gave them a call and just said, hey, do you remember when we were having that conversation and you said you would like a bike? Well, guess what? I have a bike for you. And the reactions were, they were hilarious. Like, really, miss, you have a bike? This is serious? Like, I didn't even believe that you would go ahead and do that. And so me being a mother of 4, I have a minivan. I put down all the seats and loaded up 10 bikes into my minivan. I got my friend, who was actually one of the sponsors, to come along to videotape our experience and the reactions of the youth. And so the next day we went and we delivered the bikes door to door. And the reactions we got of the youth were so heartwarming. They were smiling, they were so excited, they wanted to try the bike. And I just remember wanting to hold on to that feeling. And I said, you know what, there's more youth who want the bikes. So there's more work to be done. So I started looking at Kijiji and asking people if they were willing to donate their bikes. And we got people to do that. I met 2 lovely ladies who did a bike drive in their own community, and they delivered 35 bikes to my house. They also purchased bikes from a police auction. So you can imagine the surprise when my husband woke up, opened up our sliding door, and we now had a bike shop in our backyard. We had loose parts, we had bikes with no seats, we had wheels, we had different size bikes. And now I just said, hey, so now you have a full-time job, but now you have a part-time job learning how to fix bikes. And it became a family affair. I had my kids cleaning the bikes, organizing them. They became the size references for our youth. And then it just became a part of our summer routine. Every week we would do a drop off, and we tried to make it exciting. We started promoting it on Instagram Live when we were doing deliveries, and we would have our youth interact and say, oh, I want you to deliver our bike first, or let's do a challenge. So we started doing some TikTok challenges while they were getting their bikes. By the time we delivered our 35th bike, we were featured on CBC News, and then our initiative blew up. We had people dropping off bikes at my doorstep. We were picking up bikes all over Ontario. And by the end of the summer, we had delivered 150 bikes, predominantly to our youth and children in Malton. And we ended our initiative with a community bike ride. And we had 60 participants come out on their bikes, and we rode around our neighborhood and finished it by having some ice cream and taking pictures. And yeah, like now I look at a bike as something different. Previously, I would have looked at it as just, 2-wheel, the body, something as a mode of transportation. But now it symbolizes opportunity, experience, friendship, and freedom. And during that pandemic, it offered a safe space where people could share that space, right, and still be social. And I hope that the story doesn't actually end, and that this summer we can create a sequel and continue to provide bikes for our multi-community, and just keep giving bikes and let the bike keep giving to our community. Thank you.
Wow, thanks so much, Janice. That was such an inspiring story. I can't believe that you really proved the saying, if there's a will, there's a way, because you never took no for an answer, and you just figured it out as you went. And that's what an incredible accomplishment to get 150 bikes to kids last year. One quick question I have for you is, obviously you've had to take on more logistics probably than expected, rather than just getting a bike and getting it to a kid. So when you do it again this year, what kind of logistics lessons are you going to apply? Do you have a team of volunteers, or do you have some structure that you're going to bring to this?
Yeah, so actually through networking last year, we've connected with people who do repairs. We have people who are willing to donate bikes and purchase bikes. So I've actually had to do more administrative work as well, right? So creating lists for people who need the bikes, for people who are willing to help and do like pop-up repair shops. And we're starting now to get like a list of students, and we've already connected with some people who are willing to donate and purchase bikes. And hopefully, as the weather gets a little bit nicer, that we can start this initiative again.
Awesome. We got a question from the audience from Agata. You mentioned that a couple of the kids didn't know how to ride a bike. So how did they learn?
Well, so myself and my friend who came with us on our weekly adventures, we would always stop by his house and we'd get out the bike and we would just ask him to go on the bike and literally run behind him holding the bike seat, like how I would with my own kid. And just like keep encouraging him, praising him. You know, we videotaped him riding the bike. And when he did ride independently, we were his cheerleaders. We were going crazy, literally doing cartwheels for him. And that just developed his confidence. And we hope that this summer he'll be using his bike.
Wow, that's amazing. It really goes to show what some encouragement and having someone believe in you can do. Well, thanks so much, Janice. Again, we'll see you at the end along with Bradley and the other storytellers. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our third storyteller for Bikes+Children.
Thank you.
Carly Ross has been riding a bike since they were a child. From fun adventures with family to adapting to restrictions on urban mobility, they see cycling as a source of freedom and adventure. Beyond biking and growing food in their garden, they also tutor math and study computer science, all while playing with data and fostering community development as a member of the board of Bike Calgary. Drawing on early experiences of bicycling, these days their main passion is active transportation narratives and connecting others with the stories that inspire and illuminate mobility choices and challenges. Over to you, Carly. And we can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I feel so honored to be able to share my story with Bike Minds today. So when I look at cycling, I think that people come to biking for a variety of reasons. And there's a lot of value in examining these reasons. For myself, I would say less that I came to riding a bike as an option in various settings and more that it was shown to me. And particularly that it was shown to me by my parents and my uncle while on a family bike trip from Jasper to Banff. I am pictured on this slide somewhere during the trip. I don't exactly know where. So to this day, I feel so lucky to have parents who are willing to take our family on a bike trip. My folks aren't big cyclists themselves. We kind of only rode casually as a family, and this trip was simply something that they saw value in for our family. On this trip, it was my uncle who was the typical cyclist. And this range of cycling attitudes, abilities, and culture, as demonstrated by the adults in my life and on this trip, had a deep, profound, and lasting impact on me. So the year was 1993, and in early July, my parents, my sister, my uncle, and myself set out to ride from Jasper to Banff on our bikes. My uncle, being the serious cyclist amongst us, would drive our truck and camper to the next campground at the start of every day and then bike back to meet us. As a family, we would set out to ride until we reached that campground. While I did not have to carry all my own gear, there was no option to stop riding once the truck left for the day. It was just us and the road to the next campground. Through the trip, it was not lost on me that I was by far the youngest person I saw riding a bike. The trip from Jasper to Banff is hugely popular for bike touring, usually done in about 3 days. And even in the early 90s, there were several groups of people doing this trip, but there were no other kids. It was not until several years after the trip that I realized that the actions and behaviors of the adults on this trip deeply influenced the direction of my life. So I was never an athletic kid, and I am not an athletic adult. I am more prone to get lost in deep thought than I am to go out and try to learn a new physical skill. I tend to really struggle, fumble, and feel awkward with any new athletic skill. As a kid, I was always the bookworm, the quiet child, that kid in the corner playing alone. And to this day, I tend to feel quite awkward and very much not athletic. And yet bikes are a huge cornerstone of my life. And it's not as if I came to this bookishness out of the blue. My parents and my sister, like myself, enjoy physical activity, but are not strongly athletically inclined. By choosing to do this trip, my parents showed me that one does not need to be an athlete or, strongly athletic to use bikes to go out and explore the world. So beyond just riding our bikes to get from Jasper to Banff, we also explored a lot of places along the way. This picture in particular shows us when we're at the Columbia ice fields, and the markers that you're seeing are the year markers for the retreat of the glaciers, this particular glacier. This image and this experience really stuck with me as I grew and learned more about climate change, and also impacted the direction of my life. So there are a lot of particular stories I wish I could share about this bike trip, but there's one that still makes me laugh, shake my head, feel pride, and roll my eyes all at once. And it occurred on the last day of our trip. We had packed up all the food for the trip. We had to pack all the food for the trip at the beginning, as there are limited grocery stops between Jasper and Banff, and we were doing the trip over 10 days. And so on this fine July day, we found ourselves sitting at a picnic table, eating stiff dried pita and peanut butter for lunch. Well, it did not taste terrible. Even in our exercise-induced need for calories, it is not what I would call an inspiring meal. Well, it just so happened that on this day, a supported bike tour decided to eat lunch at the same spot as us. Their support van pulled in just beside us just after we had started eating. Their stove came out, then the fresh bread, then the cheese, then the gingham tablecloths and full service dishware. And before we knew it, the smell of grilled cheese sandwiches, my favorite food as a 9-year-old, were tantalizing our noses, and our stale pita even seemed more so in that moment. Needless to say, 9-year-old me was not very impressed with this tour group. Well, my family and this tour group finished eating all at about the same time, and the 5 of us pulled out just behind this group. Not long after our lunch, we came up to a big steep hill. It is fair to say that everyone other than my uncle was really struggling on this hill. He, being, a pretty strong cyclist, had to wait for us. And while doing this, he did the somewhat annoying thing of riding up and down the hill, up and down the hill. The tour group was none too pleased, and fair enough. But what sticks in my memory to this day was how on each pass, he gave both my sister and myself encouraging words, and that the power of those words were that they reminded me there in that moment that I had the right to be on a bike. Young as I was, simple as my gear was, and yes, as stale as my lunch was. So I don't remember if I made it to the top of the hill by pedal power, but I do remember the feeling of belonging given when my uncle chose to encourage me to keep going. I remember feeling like I didn't need fancy clothes, a fancy bike, or even clickless shoes to be on a bike, even though that is what he had. I was able to hold my head high and simply ride the bike I had. I still draw on this feeling. Often when I'm out riding with other people, I don't have fancy gear, the same level of skill, and I'm often in a minority, either a gender minority or economic minority. And yet I know I belong on a bike. So the goal of this story is not to glorify any one way of being a bicyclist. Rather, it is to point out and amplify that even across difference in age, in cycling culture, and in identity, the stories that we tell each other matter. In all the years that I have known my uncle, the most powerful moment he shared with me as a cyclist was the moment when he lent me his power to make me feel like I could keep going amidst a group of strange adults who got to eat grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch. So for me, the question now, when I look at my life, is really what stories do we tell each other? And are there organizations out there seeking to make this a reality? So I would be remiss at this point if I did not amplify both the work of Bike Calgary, where I sit on the board, but particularly of Two Wheel View, an organization that one of my fellow Bike Calgary board members works for. Two Wheel View seeks to help youth develop social and emotional skills using bikes as the medium, and they run Earn a Bike programs. And we're started as an organization that takes youth, and particularly youth that wouldn't have that opportunity otherwise, on bike trips. So in conversations with my colleague, what stands out is that when youth explore the world on a bike, it can create a sense of power and autonomy, and that when people ride together, they bond. And yes, this is often over food. And so I think that there's a lesson. See, I'm not a fan of the narrative that if you can do it, so can I. But I will always remember the power of someone with vastly more skill and strength than myself telling me I could keep going, not because I needed to bike the way that he did, but simply because even if what I had for lunch was stale pita and peanut butter, and the bike I was riding was a small, simple kid's bike, I could carry myself with pride and be on my bike exactly as I am. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Carly. A very inspiring story and very well told. I loved all the ups and downs and the emphasis and the grilled cheese and the stale pita. That was awesome. We have one question from the audience. What is your favorite bike trip meal now? Is it still grilled cheese?
No, I tend to be more of a, when I'm out on trips or even just on long rides, I actually tend to be more a fan of simple food. So I usually do like nuts and dried fruit, which 9-year-old me wouldn't have been impressed with, but adult me loves.
You've turned into a pragmatist.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's so amazing too that you're a member of Bike Calgary, and you can apply the lessons that you've learned as not falling into the definition of a traditional cyclist, and helping that organization to reach other members of the community too. Do you have any, we do have people here from cycling advocacy all over the place. Do you have any advice that you'd give them for, how to reach those people who aren't necessarily going to put their hand up and say that they're a cyclist?
Well, I think it's always a challenge if you're not if it's not an identity you have experience with. I think the big thing is just showing up with humility and recognizing that there's probably a lot of things you don't know. That would be my biggest takeaway, both historically and in my life today, is that it's very easy to think we have the answers. And I think as bike advocates, we have a lot of answers, but there's also a lot that we don't know, and a lot of stories that we haven't necessarily taken the time to listen to. And so there's an opportunity to practice humility in that.
Well said. Great message. Okay. Thanks again, Carly. We're going to move on to our fourth and final storyteller for the event. Lotte BECH is an architect and urban planner and consultant in urban cycle planning. She is a member of the Cycling Embassy of Denmark and the International Committee of the Danish Cyclists Federation. Lotte is promoting cycle culture and Danish experiences on cycle education for children. She is a cycling games enthusiast, sharing the method learning by playing on events, workshops, and pilot projects in schools. So far, cities in Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, Taiwan, and Japan are all practicing the Danish cycling games. She also organizes Bikeable City masterclasses in Copenhagen for foreign urban planners, politicians, and NGOs. Over to you, Lotte.
Thank you very much. A warm welcome to everybody from Copenhagen. I will tell you about my experiences with the Danish cycle culture and how I got enthusiastic about getting children to bike in cities around the world. I have been a cyclist myself since I got my first bicycle when I was 5 years old, and today my grandson got his at his 2 years birthday. For achieving a good cycle culture, it all starts with the kids. When I got a job in the city of Copenhagen more than 20 years ago, my first responsibility was to create the Green Bicycle Route Network, which is used for both commuting and recreation. There you see a lot of parents biking with their children in safe surroundings. Politicians in the city of Copenhagen have set up very ambitious goals in the bicycle strategy. From being a good, they want to be the best city in the world for cyclists. Today, 50% of the citizens who go to work and study in Copenhagen go by bike. Foreign visitors to Copenhagen are astonished to see the amount of everyday cyclists, and also to see children and parents going by bike to school and work. Here you see a cycle counter on one of the most busy places for cyclists, with about 50,000 cyclists a day. You may ask, how comes that cycling has become mainstream in Copenhagen? The answer is that it is a result of a very conscious and dedicated work to develop the cycle culture, not just by providing safe bicycle infrastructure, but also by focus on campaigning and especially on cycle education for children. The Danish Cyclist Federation is playing a very important role in promoting cycling in Danish kindergartens and schools, here with the campaign We Can Bike. Together with kindergartens and movement pedagogues, they have created a series of cycling games, and they assist new kindergartens to get started. You will find instruction in the book on 20 cycling games and videos from the Cyclist Federation. Through the different games, the children develop skills to balance, to maneuver, to orientate, and to give signals while they are playing and having fun. This method, learning by playing, is in fact the way small children are learning and developing. Here you see children from the kindergarten Hylde in Copenhagen that started the cycling games. The children are playing the cycling games every Friday morning, which is the highlight of the week. The children just love it. I am very enthusiastic about these games, which are creating so much joy and excitement among the children and a real passion for the bicycle. We have seen that these children continue to bike in school, and later cycling becomes their natural choice for local transportation. I started the international promotion of these cycling games at the World Bike Forum in Medellin, Colombia in 2015. Here the organizers wanted me to arrange events in the public space that could create interest for cycling among the citizens and also could have a long-lasting effect on the cycle culture in the city. I was sure that this could be achieved with focus on the children. Together with very dedicated people from the metropolitan area of Medellin, Valle de Aburrá, we created a 2-day cycling games event in a central square with children from 40 public kindergartens. Here the children are learning by playing the game catching soap bubbles, and as you see, they do it with one hand. This event created a major interest in the press and among the citizens and the World Bike Forum participants, and it was spread to other cities. Today, the Danish cycling games have been introduced to 10 cities in Latin America and to 6 in Asia. Here from Taiwan, the children are getting a diploma as reward for the participation in the event. The cycling games in Pasto, Colombia is for the benefit of 2,500 children in Pasto and the region Nariño. Here they are playing the Cannon King and the Ships in Lima, Peru. The latest cycling games event was in Quito, Ecuador, with balance bicycles donated by a Danish company. In Quito, a pilot project is initiated in a public school where cycling games are practiced on a regular basis and evaluated for others to start. The typical activities are workshop for coming instructors, public cycling games events to create awareness, and pilot projects initiated in kindergartens and schools. Here you see in Santiago de Chile, a catching game is inspired by a local popular children's story. Here you see the bike test in Danish schools, checking cycling skills in traffic for each pupil and knowledge of road safety measures. This was already working when I went to school. The international activities are often supplemented by a conference for a larger group of professionals sharing the Danish experiences with traffic safety education in schools. There is a special interest for the role of the Danish Traffic Safety Council, which is providing teaching material for the traffic education and guidance for the school's bike test. I introduced the Danish experiences with cycle education for children in Japan in 2016 and 18. And today the cycling games are practiced in 5 cities. Here you see the games in Shizuoka City. It is a great pleasure and motivation for me to see the impact of this work. I have seen it has been an eye-opener for many cities to turn from a traditional school education approach to the learning by playing method. As the mayor in Shizuoka put it at a delegation visit to Denmark, he said, "We have learned from you to start early with the children on balance bicycle with focus on the body and the balance, and later they get a traffic safety training in school. In Japan, we do it the other way around. The children have to get this theory in schools before they may bike." 1 year later, I participated with the mayor in the inauguration of the Danish cycling games in 59 kindergartens in the city of Shizuoka for the benefit of 900 children. Another source of inspiration, which also includes children and bikes, is the Bikeable City Masterclass in Copenhagen. Here you will get first-hand experience in the Danish cycle culture and cycling solutions. I hope to welcome many of you in Copenhagen and to show you the cycling games live. Here you have links to the book 20 Cycling Games and the videos, and also to the website of the Cycling Embassy of Denmark. You are very welcome to contact me for any further information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lotte. It's so inspiring, the work that you do to help the next generation. We have a couple questions for you from the audience. One of which is, we saw that you shared the resource to the cycling games. That's great. Can the cycling training or education guide be adapted to adults in your experience?
Yes, it could. Yes. I have not tried it myself, though when I make the workshop for coming instructors, we do make the cycling games for these instructors. So it is not for them to learn how to bike, but it is for them to learn how to instruct the cycling games in front of the children.
Okay. Another question from the audience: has the culture of cycling education in Denmark changed to the benefit of increasing cycling in Denmark as a result of these games?
I'm sure about this because in fact, teaching the children in an early age is like putting the seeds for the coming cycle culture. And if we miss to educate the children, we risk to lose this cycle culture in just one generation. So it is crucial for our cycle culture that we start early with the children.
Well said. Okay, we're in our last about 5 minutes of the event, so I'm going to invite the rest of the storytellers to join us all on screen. And we're going to have a bit of a group discussion. Audience members, feel free to send some group questions in, but I'm going to kick it off. We've heard 4 very different stories of how children come into cycling, one through games, one through a passionate parent, one through an uncle, and one through a passionate community leader. How can we make this more of a standard element of childhood here in Canada and in other countries around the world, where it doesn't have to be someone going above and beyond to create a cycling education experience for children? Maybe let's have Janice go first, since you're the teacher here.
I mean, it really depends on the community, right? Where I teach, it's a marginalized community, a lot of new immigrants. So in Malton, there may not be the resources to have the bikes, right? Versus another community where parents are always purchasing bikes as their children grow into different sizes. So I guess it just has to look at the resources that the community has, and I guess work with the local government and see if there's grants or things like that to support each community so that everybody has an opportunity to have a bike and enjoy cycling.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I would just like to kind of build on what Janice has said and say, I really amplify that. I do think that, well, we want it to be like a global phenomenon. I also think it has to be a community-based approach. And that's part of where we don't necessarily know what different communities are needing or how to approach those needs if we don't do the work of recognizing each community is going to be able to identify its needs more adeptly than I necessarily can. So yeah, really, really amplify that it has to depend on the community.
I would just chime in that, our world has had a lot of conversations recently about equity and inclusivity. And for people with disabilities, sometimes they're referred to as kind of the silent minority, and they can kind of be invisible. So it does take some intentionality to say, are those people being included? Are they intentionally being included? Are we looking for programs in which they can participate? And I'm seeing more of it, but it definitely has to be, an intentional effort. It's not just going to happen on its own.
All right, we have one question left over for you, Bradley, but I think the other members of the group could answer this too, especially given Janice's experience in managing the fixing of 150 bikes. What does it look like to engineer the cycles that are needed for Lilia's needs and have these become DIY projects for you and your family to explore?
It's really been a combination of a couple of DIY projects and a couple of kind of adaptive cycles that are made by very reputable and well-known adaptive cycling companies. So that trail-a-bike, we had to find some of our own adaptations, and I don't know that I'd recommend towing a trike behind a tandem, but it worked for us. That was definitely a DIY. But there's a whole world of adaptive cycling out there. When I first started getting involved with it, it's just like going down a major rabbit hole. And there's so many resources in terms of equipment and even organizations to kind of get a start. Less along the lines of the bike camping aspect that I talked about, but yeah, I would say it's a combination of sometimes having to DIY a unique solution, but also being able to find solutions out there that might already meet your needs.
And I was just gonna add to that. I feel like once people are aware about what you're doing, a lot of people want to support. So I was actually just looking at the attendees, and Chris Hamill is one of our, he's watching this, and he reached out to me. He's from Mississauga, and he came actually to my house with another person, and the two of them plus my husband were doing repairs on some of these bikes that we provided to our students and to our community. So I feel like once you have a platform and people are aware of what you're doing, you build a support network and people want to help. So I feel like it's just letting people know, and people will show up and do the work.
Well said, Bradley and Janice. Okay, well, we're just about at the hour, so I'm going to call things to a close. Let's have, everybody in wherever you are in the world, I hope you're giving a round of applause to our storytellers today. They were all so inspiring. We did record today's event, so we're going to be posting that on our website about a week from now, and that link will also include all of Lotte's links that she shared and how you can get in touch with her, and the other storytellers as well if they're interested in sharing that. So thanks everyone for attending and joining us for this really inspiring session, and keep up with us on our website, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.